And welcome into the Roundtable. Bill Priestley here with you. And again, talking about the derailment that happened in East Palestine, Ohio. And probably no better person to talk with here in our Roundtable than Jim Hall, former chairman of the NTSB, Chattanooga resident here as well. Jim, so thanks so much for stopping by the studio here today.
No, thank you for the invitation.
It's great to have you. Obviously, you're no stranger to incidents like these, but when you first heard of this particular one, what were your impressions of just the accident in and of itself, and then the NTSB and what they're going to try to do to try and investigate and figure out how this all went down?
Which, East Palestine?
Yeah.
Well, the East Palestine accident is, one that was waiting to happen, and the NTSB has got its response there, and we'll make a number of recommendations, but we don't have a common sense safety procedures in our nation for the transport of hazardous materials. The folks that you serve and the people out on the highways know more about what's in their trucks than the state of Ohio knew as what was on that train. And we have some very, toxic chemicals that are being transported. And Congress has got to step in with common sense oversight so that these first responders and the citizens are not put at risk when an incident like this occurs.
That's obviously your biggest concern, obviously, when you look at the vinyl chloride that escaped.
The vinyl chloride, a 2-mile train, which cars and where in the consist of the train were the hazardous material cars? Were they placed there for safety reasons or economic reasons? The NTSB is very well known for what we do in aviation safety, and that's because ever since the Wright brothers, who started it, every accident has been investigated with the idea of what can be done to prevent that accident from happening again. We don't have that same sort of protection, particularly on the rail, on ocean freight, or on our highways. And we need to give more attention to consolidating the information in a way that it is useful for first responders, particularly, and citizens, because all we're going to see is an increase in the amount of hazardous materials out there.
That even said, at this point, looking at it at an NTSB investigation, what should Norfolk Southern expect coming out of it? Obviously, they're going to take a hard look at everything in this accident.
Well, I hope Norfolk Southern takes a hard look at everything.
The NTSB certainly.
Well, the NTSB will certainly take a hard look at everything. We have already, concluded the on-site part of the investigation. The process is, with the NTSB, is the first is the collection of facts. That's what I call the Jack Webb. I'm old enough to remember Dragnet, and actually I've watched Dragnet. And the collection of the facts, that's done with all the parties to the investigation. So the state of Ohio, local officials, everyone with Norfolk Southern, the unions, all are there to let's agree on the facts, fellas, and then we'll go back and analyze the facts. And analyzing the facts from many of these rail accidents is just looking at it as deja vu. It's like looking at the same information all over again. The railroads have a unique situation in transport. They own their tracks. The only thing the public wants them to do is keep their train on their tracks. And they are thinly regulated in Washington, D.C. They're thinly regulated at the state and local level. And there is a division, as you've seen up at East Palestine, between the EPA and the Department of Transportation. And, things like that in Washington just don't happen. They're designed because you got more places, more toll booths for the lobbyists.
Gotcha. we talked a little bit about what Norfolk Southern can expect. Obviously, what about the industry as a whole? Obviously, the NTSB will more than likely have recommendations coming out of this. What should the industry? How much attention should they pay to it as a whole?
Well, they'll be paying a lot of attention. Unfortunately, I hope it'll be for safety reasons. Because I think we've seen with Boeing and now with Norfolk Southern, these are going to be multi-million, if not billion-dollar accidents. Mm-hmm. And that can have a certain impact on the bottom line. But the recommendations here will be probably the same that were made before, hydraulic braking. Mm-hmm. These 2-mile trains with air brakes, that just doesn't make common sense. And that recommendation was made, and we had the former president show up who was the individual under whose administration killed the hydraulic brakes on the trains, like on the hazardous material cargo trains. So if I sound a little frustrated, it's because I am. The American people pay for safety, and they pay for Congress to do its job. And this is an ideal situation in which no one has really stood out in doing their job.
You mentioned the hazardous material part of it. Obviously, there's the safety portion of it. Whether or not there were hazardous materials on the train is of irrelevant use, at least at the outset, just because there was an accident. How much does that, if any, impact the NTSB's investigation that there were hazardous materials on board the train?
Well, it really doesn't impact it other than we have experts in the area of hazardous materials, because we're going to be looking at the integrity of the tank cars, how, were the containers were carrying these materials designed properly, and did the design hold up in the accident? So there's a lot. The reason it takes about a year for the NTSB to do an investigation is because it's a peel-back process, and you go through each and every detail of that accident to try and get as much information as you can, and that's what will happen in this one as well. Obviously,
every investigation has its own kind of flavor, but at the same time, it's always an accident. It's always going to be, some sort of damage of some sort. Is there a kind of a kind of a list of how things go from here? In other words, once the accident happens, obviously you say you've got your fact finding, you've got your report, your preliminary report, and then eventually you get your year.
The fact-finding process, and then you have the evaluation, and the NTSB experts will evaluate the facts. Now, under our rules, Norfolk Southern or any other party to the investigation can do their own evaluation and write a report. Those reports then go to the independent board. That's what I chaired during the Clinton administration. And that board is the final determiner then of what the probable cause, the conclusions from the report, the probable cause, and then the recommendations. And the recommendations are our most important product, because that's where we say these actions could have been taken, and we are not restrained on economics. Under Ronald Reagan, we put in, the cost-benefit analysis, which many in Washington call the tombstone technology. You have to have enough deaths in order to justify economically the safety action. So we have to fight that system and lobby for our recommendations. However, the recommendations are, again, as a part of a long process looking at the whole accident.
When you look at this accident versus others that you have seen, perhaps even in your own tenure as chairman, do similar accidents reveal similar results?
Yes.
Okay. And in this particular case, what would you expect?
Well, we're going to, see, unfortunately, the right hand and the left hand didn't know what was on the train, probably, in a prompt period of time. I don't know who made the decisions on burning the vinyl chloride, which obviously is something that is going to be looked at. There's a chemical safety board as well as the National Transportation Safety Board that will look at this. issue. So the whole process will go forward, but it's not much different. You end up with the event and the attention on the event, and by the time the TV cameras are gone, the public's mind is gone on the subject usually.
So what's your greatest concern now moving forward through this entire process from, say, obviously now that the facts are being brought together and then eventually, obviously, the recommendations at the end of the project?
I would like to see come out of this event a system for the meaningful tracking of hazardous materials, for the placing of those materials in certain, being sure that there's an oversight system in terms of the containers the materials are shipped in, and as well as what the volatility or danger is of each and every material, and that information should be easily accessible to the first responders in every state in the union that the materials are going through.
Well, it's certainly going to be something we'll be keeping our eyes on over the course of the next 12 to 18 months, however long the investigation lasts. Jim Hall, thanks so much for joining us.
Sure. Thank you.
All right, we'll take a short break. We'll come back right after this with more FreightWaves Now.